we have Ipswich against Man United, 4:30 televised kickoff on Sunday at Portman Road. Ipswich were able to climb out of the drop zone by beating Spurs right before the break. That was their first win of the season. The key sort of aspect to consider this game, though, for this game, is that it will be Ruben Amorim's first game in charge of Man United. He'll be taking charge of Man United team sitting in 13th, although they did have a bit of a resurgence under Ruud van Nistelrooy, having beaten Leicester and drawing to Chelsea. Because of this sort of unknown in that regard, it is a bit of a banana skin fixture, in my opinion. But we can also sort of gain a bit of an edge by taking advantage of the uncertainty. So I've had a read of a couple of TFA articles last night to gain a better understanding of how Amorim might change the setup at United and how we can sort of utilize that. So if we look into a typical Sporting lineup under Amorim, we can see it's quite different to how United would normally set up. So if we look how they set up against Chelsea, against Man City in the Champions League, you can see they played three at the back, wing backs, and a front three with two sort of inside forwards. In that game against City, they played very, very vertical, which was sort of catalysed by wing backs who were very, very willing to get forward and attack. Man United historically have never really played anything other than a sort of four at the back. So I think asking them to change so radically straight away, I'm not sure if that's completely realistic. But we can sort of see, I can definitely imagine certain players for Man United fitting into this sort of system. So if we think of Diomande as the centre back, as a sort of physical presence in that back line, we can see sort of De Ligt or even Harry Maguire playing that role. He's sort of flanked by two better ball playing centre backs, so that would be Alessandro Martinez, for example, who could fit in there nicely as one of those two. In the double pivot, I think the most natural player there would be Manuel Ugarte, and he is a player to talk about a bit more for this because he played under Amorim for 2 seasons, in the 2021 season to 22 and 22 to 23, before earning his move to PSG. So Amorim certainly knows how to get the best out of him. And if we look into his data under Amorim in those 2 seasons, we can see, if we look into his fouls, in his first season he's had 34 fouls in 12.3 90s, so that's averaging 2.7 fouls per 90, which is very, very high. Also consider that Sporting finished second in that campaign. And then in a more complete season, when he was just 21, Ugarte had 64 fouls in 26.1 90s, so 2.4 fouls per 90. So very, very high numbers for a centre midfielder in a high-performing team. So we can see Sporting finish second and then fourth. So that is something to note. But also his fouled numbers, he's averaging over or around two fouls drawn per game. So he was heavily involved in midfield. And I think he might be given a bigger role this season under Amorim, or for the rest of the season. So he's one to keep an eye on. If we look into his foul prices, he's a bit short. He's priced at 1.62 with both Sky and Paddy to commit 2 or more fouls. But to sort of boost that, you can look to double that with Hutchinson to draw a foul, or even Liam Delap to sort of get that around backable. So that's the first thing to consider. I think Amorim will give Ugarte a big role. Next up, we can see that Sporting typically played with inside forwards. So we have Trincao and Pedro Goncalves. And it's a bit more difficult to consider who fits into those roles. So what I read was a lineup with Højlund and Xerxes is not impossible. Could see Xerxes in that sort of role just behind the main striker, which is obviously a bit more natural to him, given that he's not really an out-and-out number 9. But I would imagine the other sort of inside forward would be Bruno. I think he makes the most sense. And in a more sort of advanced role, I think he's one to target again for goal involvement. So looking into his data so far this season, he's registered just 2 goals and 3 assists in 11 games, but he has seen a notable uptick since Ten Hag was sacked. So he's actually registered 6 goals and assists in those 4 games under Ruud van Nistelrooy, landing a goal or assist in all 4 of those games. And if he is to sort of play as an inside forward, you imagine he'll still be on set pieces, he'll be on penalties, and he'll be up against an Ipswich side who have conceded the highest XG total in the league so far. So an ideal matchup here. And that brings me on to a second angle, which would be Bruno to score or assist, which is priced at 1.91 with Paddy. I think that's actually a really big price considering the matchup, considering that he's landed this in each of his last 4 games. And he has been due some regression. He's actually registered the highest XG in the league for Man United with 4, scoring just 2 goals from that. And he's also registered the most expected assisted goals as well. So he's been the sort of main man for United so far, even despite his sort of lack of output up until this point. But he is due, as I say, he is due some regression. So that would be the second angle. Ugarte will be the first angle with backing him to make fouls. But I think it's the first game for Amorim, so we can't say for certain whether he will go for his new system. We can't say for certain which players will play in the system. We might see Bruno in a deeper role, in which case we don't really want to be backing his sort of goal involvement markets. But I would imagine it's best to watch and sort of analyse this game and then use that information going forward. I think for the first game, it's always difficult, especially when Amorim is expected to make such drastic changes. So as I say, I'll be covering this game in potentially a bit more detail as a Twitter thread. So make sure you're following me on that platform if you're not already. That will conclude all the Sunday games, so that's the weekend finished. But we